I'm Diane Kresh, Director of Arlington Library. Welcome to Arlington Reads this evening. I'm recognizing some familiar faces from a couple of weeks ago when we hosted Ann Beattie for the first of our two programs, Dazed and Confused, talking about the generation that came of age after the 1960s. We have the Friends of the Library to thank for sponsoring Arlington Reads, which is now in its 9th year. So if we can take a second and give them a round of applause. All of our programming, all of our children's programming and adult programming is sponsored and supported by the Friends, and they're a very important partnership with us. We're thrilled to be joined this evening by Jeffrey Brown. Many of you know him from the Arlington-based NewsHour. He's not just an Emmy Award-winning journalist who's covered the economy, the arts, culture, telecommunications, and healthcare, to name a few, but he's also an Arlington resident, and we're happy to report a familiar face in this building. He's the third NewsHour journalist that we've featured in Arlington Library. We previously hosted both Gwen Ifill and Jim Lira. So that's another nice relationship that we're very happy to have. And also Jeffrey was suggested by our guest author this evening to do the interview. So I think this is going to be a terrific evening. Richard Ford's Independence Day was the first book to win both the PEN/Faulkner Award for Fiction and the Pulitzer Prize, both within a week of each other. Our Arlington Reads featured title, The Sports Writer, established the everyman character of Frank Bascombe for what was eventually a trilogy with Independence Day and The Lay of the Land, and as recently reported, a forthcoming collection of short stories, Let Me Be Frank with You, to be published later this year. Frank Bascombe is an ordinary guy just trying to get by, dealing with the death of a child, mismanaging complicated relationships with his children, his ex-wife, his girlfriends, a man as easy to dislike as he is to like. And yet his vulnerability, his humor, and his humanity shine forth, giving the reader cause to root for Frank as he, and each of us, tries to find hope and goodwill in even those most seemingly hopeless situations. Time has called The Sports Writer one of the 100 best novels published since that magazine was founded. In addition to his 7 novels, Richard Ford has also been honored for his masterful short stories with both a Rhea Award and a PEN Malamud, and he is a noted editor of short story collections. We co-hosted a terrific afternoon with students from Marymount University this afternoon, and Richard and the students covered a wide range of topics, including the value of reading, do lots of it, the writing life, do whatever you can to avoid it, and whether people can change, that's up to you to decide. So ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome 2014 Arlington Reads featured author Richard Ford and NewsHour Jeffrey Brown.
What was I saying? I was just saying that yes, we're pals, but I'm a longtime reader too, and a great admirer of, embarrass him, but I think this is one of our great writers. I'm going to assume that many of you have read The Sports Writer, because we're going to talk a little bit about this character of his, as I've talked to him on the NewsHour in the past. But I wanted to start with the news about it, which is that he's back.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So why is he back?
Well, for some good reasons. Christina and I, my wife and I, went down to South Jersey, down to Lavallette and Toms River right after Hurricane Sandy. And I had decided after I wrote the Lay of the Land that I wasn't going to write any more Frank Bascombe novels because it was too hard. And finishing books for me is a real trial. That's great to write books. It's fun to write books, but then you get to that point when what you've written has to be, all the words have to be in the right place. So I decided I wasn't going to do that anymore. And so we went down to see, because we'd spent a lot of time in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and we were very interested in what was going on down there. And so on the way back, we just were starting to talk, and I noticed that some of the things that we were noticing and saying, I thought, gee, Frank Bascom could say that, Frank Bascom could say that, that could be. So I thought, well, that's what Henry James calls a donné. It really is something that you're given. And I thought, well, what can I do if I have this donné? Here I have a disaster. That seemed a little bit iffy. So I thought, well, I don't want to write a whole long novel because I had just written Canada. And so I thought, well, I'll write 4 novellas. And I lighten the novella form. It's not a very popular form in this country or in any other country for that matter. But it still is a good form. I mean, they say you can read a novella on a long train ride. So I thought that, yeah, you just did one. You just did one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought, fine, do that. So it didn't have publishing so much at its heart. It was just, I just wanted to write it. So at heart, I just wanted to use it.
You did tell people after The Lay of the Land that was the end.
I did.
And I was one of them you told.
I did.
In public.
I did. I did. I wasn't lying.
So this is your chance
This is
to apologize
to you for misleading the American public. But you know, the truth is, since we're going to tell the truth, when I was running around the world with Canada, a lot of people came up to me at book signings and said, would you not please consider writing another Frank Bascom book? And I thought, only a fool would say no, because the one thing you want when you write a book is a readership. And here was a readership of people who really thought that there was a reason to read such a book again. So I thought, well, give it a crack anyway. So I wrote that one story, which I gave you, and then I thought, well, I'll write another one, and then I'll write another one, and then I'll write another one. So that's how it happened.
But when we talked about him, I think for Lay of the Land, I remember asking you, does he come back because he calls out to you, or because you need him in some fashion? It was the latter, more than him.
Well, I think I do anyway. I have that voice that I can write in, and its value to me is as a sort of a voice that implies an intelligence. I can transact a lot of experience with that voice. It's also comic, and it's also at the same time serious. So it's very attractive to me to do it. So it's available to me to do, but I kind of think that I just decide to do it, and maybe I have a need to do it. But I think what I do is I just decide I'm going to do it. Sometimes people will say to writers, do your characters just take over? And I always say, no, they don't. I take over. I run everything. And that's what it means to be an author. It means you authorize everything. and so when I think the characters have the potential to sort of take over, then I slap them down. Sometimes people say, what are your characters doing when you're not around? And I say, they're not doing anything. They're like Charlie McCarthy. They're waiting for Edgar Bergen to come and take him out of his box.
The Lay of the Land was set in what Frank referred to as the permanent period.
Yes.
So he's in his 50s.
Yes.
An age where
you know more about that. You know more about that than I would.
Yeah.
Because I'm 70.
Well, but I did note that the new one.
Yes.
He's in his late 60s.
Yes, 67.
Yeah.
The default period.
Yeah. Yeah. So explain the permanent period versus the default period. And why do you have this need, by the way, to divide things up into periods, like the plastic?
Well, I think it actually helps. I think it actually helps the reader. Yeah. I think that most of us, convention divides our lives up into youth, middle age, old age, and I think there are still these long periods in between these conventional demarking lines that we don't know. We don't know what this period is. So I think a novel can come along and say, this period of your life, when you're in your 50s, is the permanent period. And I can't even remember what it is now, which is a blessing in a way.
But the permanent period, the idea that I recall is that it's the one you're going to be remembered for.
Right.
You
That's
know,
exactly
permanent in that
right.
sense.
Yes. That when you die, this is what people will remember about you, if they remember anything at all.
Right. So he was much concerned
Yes, he was.
about whether he would be remembered at all. At that point, that particular point, did anybody care? A lot of things had fallen
Right.
apart.
I think people think that. I think that people wonder whether they long for it or not. I don't myself particularly long for it, but some people I think long for it. You know, we always hear people talking about their legacy. I don't know what that means, but I mean, I think about my friend Ray Carver. You know, he was a great American writer, and nobody talks to me about him anymore. I go around the world. There was a time when people talked to me about him all the time. I have to bring him up. And so what happens is that you die and people forget about you. And it's okay. I mean, your kids don't, but I don't have any kids. Yeah, that was something that I was interested
Just took a depressing turn,
in.
didn't it?
No, believe me. In my life, there was nothing depressing about not having children. It was the best thing that I ever did.
No, I meant I meant that you die and nobody remembers.
We wouldn't be sitting here if I had had children, I'll tell you that.
All right, so where is Frank now? Is in his late 60s,
Right.
And it's a different period.
It's the default period.
Yeah.
And it's Frank has a former, his first wife is in a extended care facility, a very expensive extended care facility outside of Haddam, New Jersey, and she has Parkinson's, and she's fine. She's just there. Her house was blown away in the hurricane. And so that she just decided to go install herself in this place. And she makes Frank come out to see her all the time. And so what he does is he tries to become, for the benefit of her, the best person he could be, which is to say he doesn't depend on the past. He's always polite. He doesn't ask questions for which he doesn't want an answer. He's never ironic. He's never sarcastic. And I thought, well, what is that? Well, that's a person trying at this period in his life to affect to be the best person he can be for the purposes of in this case, of his ex-wife. So that's how he comports himself. And I thought that that's the sort of default self that he sort of resolves himself into. Mm-hmm. So that's what it is. And it becomes the default period of life in which you are as close to being the kind of person you would probably best be if you can do it. But the only difference between that and actual human character is that you decide that it's at your discretion, whereas if you believe Emerson, you don't have any discretion about your character. Your character is a little hard nut inside of you that only is, whereas I don't believe in that at all. I think you'd have discretion about most everything that you do and are and be. So that's what he does. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he's also at an age where he's feeling his body start to give way a bit, worried about certain things.
Yeah. You'll be there.
I think I was leading you there.
No, you don't have to lead me there because I am already there, but I fight it all I can fight it.
Yeah, but is it an accident that Frank in these books seems to be close to your particular age?
No, it's just convenient to write about, because he really isn't about me, because most of the details of his life are not matching my life at all. Never been divorced, don't have children, didn't ever sell real estate, don't live in New Jersey. And so, but it was just convenient, because the things that I knew and knew to myself to be thinking about could be tried out on him in a slightly, and in some cases, exaggeratedly different way. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you, just to go way back, and then I want you to read some of this new thing, but well, tell us where he first came from, because you just said you did
Frank.
Not this, not that, not that.
Where Frank first came from?
Where Frank first come from, yeah.
Well, he came from, first of all, from me wanting to write a character who could be both corporeal and sort of thoughtful and almost smart. I mean, that has a lot to do with my own psychology, growing up dyslexic and never being thought to be smart and longing to be smart. But all I was sort of bodily, visceral, and I was perceived that way by my teachers. And so I wanted to write characters who could actually be both corporeal and bodily and visceral and also have a brain. And so Frank came out of that wish. He also came out of some of my reading. He came out of reading Walker Percy. He came out of reading Joe Heller, Joe Heller's wonderful book, which is less known, Something Happened. If you haven't read Something Happened, it's in its own way, it is as majestic as Catch-22. And reading Fred Exley's wonderful book, A Fan's Notes. So my reading sponsored some of that, and New Jersey sponsored a good deal of it. It came, like a lot of characters do, came from different salients in life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when did you know that he was actually alive, or that he was someone you were going to work with
for 25 years?
Yeah.
Never really did.
Yeah.
I wrote one book.
Yeah.
And I was in the business at that time in my life, 1982, 1986, to writing one book. And I didn't think I had the ambition to write connected books. I didn't think I had any way that I could ever break it off. I thought that I would probably just write the next book as a sort of a rewrite of the first one, and that people would say, "Oh, Ford can't do this; he's not good enough." But when I had written The Sports Writer, and I was sort of thinking about that I wanted to write a book about a man who took his son to the Baseball Hall of Fame, and I wanted it to be set in the Northeast, I realized that all the notes that were in my notebook were in Frank Bascom's voice. And I thought, oh my God, you're given this. You have this voice, and it can do what I said before. It can transact all this experience. And it lets me write about a man and his son. And it's something I'd never contemplated doing in that way, in contemporary ways. So I just sort of thought, well, I just sort of gave into it, very much like what we were talking about with these stories, that I just gave into it. I thought, why run from something? You wait and work all your life to try to have a persuasive voice that you can write in. Here's one. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, then you better do that.
You want to read from the new one? I mean, no,
yeah.
I'm not asking. Actually,
No,
just read from the first one. Yeah.
This is called I'm Here. And it's about, it's set right after Hurricane Sandy, right toward Christmas of 2012. And as was said, it's going to be part of this book called Let Me Be Frank With You. And I'll read two little passages from it. Strange fragrances ride the twitchy, wintry air toward the shore this morning, 2 weeks before Christmas. Flowery wreaths on an ominous sea, stirring expectancy in the unwary. It is, of course, the bouquet of large-scale home repair and rehab, fresh-cut lumber, clean white PVC, the lye sniff of Saccrete and stinging sealants, sweet tar paper, denatured spirits, the starchy zest of Tyvek mingled with the ocean's sulfurous weft and Barnegat Bay's landward stink. It is the air of full-on disaster. To my nose, once practiced in these things, nothing smells of ruin as fragrantly as the first attempts at rescue. I noticed it first at the red light at Hooper Avenue, then again when I climb out to gas up my Sonata at the Hess before heading onto the bridge, Tom's River, to Seacliff. Here, in the rich gas station scents, a wintry breeze flitters my hair as my dollars spool along like a slot machine in the gathering December clouds. The breeze has set the silver whirligigs to spinning at the grandly reopened Bed Bath & Beyond at the Ocean City Mall. Only new bedding can keep us down. Across its acres of parking, a 10th full at 10 a.m., the Home Depot, Kremlin-like, but enigmatically still your friend in spite of all. Its doors are thrown open wide and early. Customers trail out, balancing boxes of new toilet works, new motherboards, new wiring harnesses, shrink-wrapped hinge assemblies, hollow core doors, an entire front stoop teetering on a giant shopping cart. All is on its way to some still standing domicile blottoed by the hurricane 6 weeks past, but not lost from memory. Everyone's still stunned here, quarrelsome, funked, put upon but resolute. All are committed to coming back. Out here under the Hess awning, someone's piped in loud sports talk radio, the Pat and Mike show for Magic 107 in Trenton. I was once among their faithful. They're old now. A booming voice, it's Mike, declares, "Wow, Patrick, Coach Benzawicki cut loose a fuselage of F-bombs, I'm telling you, a real 30 seconds over Tokyo." "Listen to it again," Mike says out of the speaker built somewhere deep inside the gas pump. Total disbelief, total. This was on ESPN. Another gravelly voice, exhausted. Coach Benzawicki takes up now, clearly in a fury. "Okay, let me just tell you so-called F-bomb sports writers one F-bomb thing. Okay, you F-bombs? When you can F-bomb coach a team of 9-year-old F-bomb grammar school girls, I might F-bomb, might give you a piece of F-bomb respect. Until then, you F-bombs, okay? You can double F-bomb yourself from here to F-bomb Sunday dinner. You heard it here first." The vacant-eyed, white-suited young attendant who's pumping my gas hears nothing, looks at me as if I wasn't there. "About says it all, I guess," Pat concedes to us customers under the breezy Hess awning. "All and then some," Mike concurs. "Just leave your keys at your desk and take the F-bomb bus back to Chillicothe, Coach Benzawicki, because you're done." "Un-F-bomb believable," Pat says. "Let's pause for a break, you F-bomb." "Me, you're the F-bomb. Ha ha ha, ha 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 ha." In recent months, I've begun compiling a personal lexicon of words that, in my view, should no longer be usable in speech or in any form. This in the belief that life is a matter of gradual subtraction, aimed at a solider, more nearly perfect essence before all mentation goes and we pick up the trib and head off to our own virtual Chillicothe's. A stockpile of fewer, better words could help with that, I think, by setting an example for clearer thinking. It's not so different from moving to Prague and not learning the language, so that the English you end up speaking to make yourself understood bears a special responsibility to be clear and value-bearing. When you grow old, as I am, you pretty much live in the accumulations of life anyway. Not that much is happening, except on the medical front. Better to strip things down. And where better to strip than the words we choose to express our increasingly rare, increasingly vagrant thoughts. It would be hard, for instance, for a Czech speaker to fully appreciate the word poop, or the phrase, "we're pregnant," or "what's the takeaway?" or, for that matter, "awesome" when it only means tolerable, or preemie, or minty, or "no problem" when you really mean "you're welcome." If I were asked to give a public lecture on this subject, I could and would. Likewise, friggin', soft landing, sibs, bond, closure, hydrate when it just means drink, make art, share, reach out, noise used as a verb, and, apropos of Magic 107, F-bomb. Fuck to me is still pretty serviceable as a noun, verb, or adjective, with clear and distinct colorations to its already rich meaning. Language imitates the public riot, the poet said. And what's today's life like, if not a riot? Late yesterday morning, my wife Sally came down to where I was eating my all-bran and stood staring, musing through the window into the backyard at the late autumn squirrel activity. I was pleased to be thinking nothing worth recording, not about anything, just breathing to the cadence of my chews. After a while of not speaking, she sat down across from me, holding a book I'd noticed her reading late into the night. Her light stayed on after I'd gone to sleep, then was switched off, then on again. It's not unusual for people our age. I read this shocking thing last night. She held the book she'd been engrossed by, clutched to her yoga shirt. Her eyes were intent. She seemed worried. I couldn't make out the book's spine, but understood she meant to tell me about it. "Tell me," I said. "Well," she pursed her lips. "Back in 1862, right when the Civil War was in full swing, our cavalry had time to put down an Indian revolt in Minnesota. Did you know that?" "I did," I said. "The Dakota Uprising. It's pretty famous." "Okay, you knew about it. I didn't." "I know some things," I said. stared down at a floating banana slice. But, okay, so in 1862, the cavalry hanged 36 Sioux warriors on one big square scaffold, just did it all at once. That's famous too, I said. Supposedly they'd massacred 800 white people, not that that's an excuse. She took in a breath and turned her head away in a manner to indicate a tear she didn't want seen might be wobbling out of her eyes. But do you know what they said? These words were nearly choked with throat-clogging emotion. What who said? The Indians. They all began shouting out as they were standing on the gallows, waiting to drop and never speak again. I didn't know, but I looked up to let her understand I realized this was important to her, and that the next thing she said would be important to me. Possibly my spoon had paused on its upward arc to my mouth. I may have shaken my head in amazement. They all shouted, "I'm here." They started calling that out in the Sioux language, all around that awful contraption that was about to kill them. People who heard it said it was awe-inspiring, not awesome. No one ever forgot it. Then they hanged them, all of them, at one moment. "I'm here," as if that made it all right for them, made death tolerable or less awful. It gave them strength. Sally shook her head. Her tear of anguish for long ago 1862 did not emerge. She held her book tight to her front and smiled at me mournfully across the glass-topped table where I've eaten possibly 3,000 breakfasts. I just thought she'd want to know about that. I'm sorry to ruin your breakfast. "I'm glad to know about it, sweetheart," I said. "It didn't ruin my breakfast at all. It didn't." "I'm here," she said, and seemed to embarrass herself. "So am I said. And with those two words, she got up, came around the table, kissed me on my forehead, still embarrassed, then went away, carrying her book back to where she'd come from in the house. So, thanks. I gave that story to Jeff earlier in the week, so he didn't know what it was about. That's the first story in the book.
And it's called I'm Here.
It's called I'm Here. Yeah.
So I did read it on a train ride back from New York this afternoon. And, well, there's all kinds of wonderful Fordisms in that passage. But actually what I wanted to ask you about is not so much well, I wanted to ask you about sound, the sound of language.
Yes.
I read the first two paragraphs. I'm glad you read the beginning, because when I read it this afternoon on the train, I stopped and read it several times, and I started reading it out loud. I was on the quiet car, which you're not supposed to do.
Oh, yeah.
But listen, strange fragrances ride the twitchy, wintry air toward the shore this morning, 2 weeks before Christmas. An evocative time, of course. Flowery wreaths on an ominous sea, stirring expectancy in the unwary. Twitchy, wintry, flowery, expectancy, unwary.
Yeah.
That's the first paragraph.
You know, all those Y sounds, all those E sounds.
Yeah. Are you aware of that? Oh, that's what author means. I forgot. Yeah.
But I'm aware of it. But it's like an internal rhyme in lines of poetry. It doesn't mean to signify anything. It doesn't have a, for me, stories aren't secrets. Stories aren't even really, for the most part, holding secrets. Stories are just there for you to read. And I hear that when you read it more than I hear it when I read it.
Well, I exaggerated
Yeah.
more. I was interested to hear how you were going to read it.
Yeah. I just wanted that E sound there in the beginning, and I also want the cadence. I also want the cadence of wintry, flowery, expectancy, unwary. I want those cadences in there. And
you continued with the lie sniff of sacrete and stinging sealant. Now we're in S. Sweet tar paper, denatured spirits, the starchy zest of...
Yeah. Yeah. This is why I'm not rich. Because I care about things like that. I mean, my teachers were Donald Hall and Galway Canal. I mean, what can you do?
Yeah, but that's what's coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean,
That makes beautiful writing.
and it makes for small book sales. But I mean, you know, my belief is that where the rubber meets the road in books is word choices. That's what readers. Well, that's why you read books. You read books principally and first to be exposed to the best possible language you can be exposed to, and it can be
Before story, before character.
well, I mean, temporarily before, absolutely. That's really what you do. You put your brain down on those words, and you know, there's that great line of the great little exchange between Degas and Mallarmé, in which Degas comes to his friend Mallarmé and says, "I've just written a sonnet which is full of wonderful ideas," and Mallarmé said, "My friend, sonnets aren't made of ideas; they're made of words." And later, 65 years later, Delmo Schwartz said, "Well, sometimes though," he said, if you put good words together, ideas can kind of bubble up." and that's how I think, that's what I think, yeah. I mean, you're right, I mean, it's not quite as blind as I'm making it out to be. I mean, I knew I was writing about the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, and the idea is to try to make the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy seem something other than what, if you'll excuse the expression, the news media have naturally caused us to understand it to be, which is to say, what it literally is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we don't have a
We have no
difference
problem
of
there.
opinion about that.
No difference whatsoever on that, yeah. And then you get to the section where you're explicitly talking about the words that should be retired.
Yes. Mentee and
Yeah.
bond and
No problem.
no probs.
I was
no
glad
problem.
to see that, because I hate that.
Yeah, it's
Everybody
not-
always says, you say something and they say, "No problem."
It's not.
And
good.
and it wasn't a problem to begin
Yes.
with.
Well, I don't have a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, literature is about trying to make the language that we speak somehow match up with thoughts, and so much of the language that we use every day just bubbles out of our mouth unimpeded and unmediated. And you know, to say no problem, and none of us could live around other people if all of our words were intellected. We couldn't do that. We wouldn't get very far. We wouldn't get past 9 o'clock. But on the other hand, literature is about making us be appreciative of words and language and the choices of them, and so that's. And also, it's from the standpoint of somebody who's marking. I write with a pen. Who's making words on a page, it's hugely pleasurable. Language just simply is pleasurable. Who was it? Bob Hughes said, Robert Hughes, who's dead now, wonderful art critic, said that what Cézanne had was experience right up in his face like that. He didn't have theory. He didn't have anything. He just had life like that. And what writers have is language. We have language right up in our face like that all the time.
It's beautiful to play with language, but is it easy? Is it any easier for you to write? I don't see you when I see you, you're not writing.
Yeah.
That's why I guess we're allowed to get together.
No,
But when you're writing, you're writing.
Yeah. I mean, yes, in a lot of ways. I mean, what I just read to you is writing, and I mean for you to understand it not as what's going on outside the window. I want you to experience it as artifice. I want you to experience it as writing, as a made thing, made for you. And so I don't think about whether or not it's easy or fun. I choose to do it. I think if you choose to do something, you have no business complaining about it being difficult ever. You can complain about things that being difficult if you're made to do it. But I think every morning when I sit down, on the mornings that I do, I think to myself, I'm doing what Chekhov did. So I think to myself, what a great opportunity every day. I'm never skeptical about it. I'm never tired about it. I'm never cynical about it.
Have you ever thought about what you would have done if you had not been a writer?
Well, I would have probably been a lawyer because I left law school to do this. And prior to that, I would have probably been a Marine Corps officer, which is what I really, really, really wanted to be. But I didn't stay in the Marines long enough for that to really make any difference. Yeah. So this is okay, though. You know, I mean, but I really mean that. I'm not poo-pooing any of it. I mean, this is fine.
Yeah.
And I don't like that sense of mission. I think if I hadn't done this, I hope that I would have done something that would have been useful to the world. I could do what I would love to do what you do. You know, to get to bring the things to people's lives that you get to bring. I think that would be great. It would be really great. When I was a sports writer working for Inside Sports and some for Sports Illustrated, if they hadn't fired me and kicked me out, I would have kept on doing it, and I would have thought I was the happiest person in the world.
Do you want to tell that story? Why did they fire you?
Well, it was. I went to work for Inside Sports in 1980. I wrote 2 novels, and then I thought nobody read them, nobody cared about them. They were okay reviewed, but nobody read them, nobody bought them. So I thought, okay, Ford, you've had your shot. You're whatever, however old I was, 37, 36. And so I thought, well, you better get a regular job. You have to make some money. Your wife's earning all the money. So I got my agent to get me some work for a magazine that Newsweek ran called Inside Sports. And so I worked for Inside Sports for 2 years, and I just loved it. I just thought it was cool. That's why I wrote The Sports Writer when they finally chucked me out. Then the magazine went out of business. And so right out from under me, so I didn't have a job anymore. So I went over to Sports Illustrated, and I wrote a couple of things for them. And I went to this guy, Gil Rogan, who was the editor of Sports Illustrated. And I said, you know, I've written a couple of pieces for you. I said, I kind of like to kind of get on. I kind of like to be working for Sports Illustrated. I thought, gee, Time Inc. was great, and, you know, Cradle to Grave, Care, everything. And he said, no, he said, you're a novelist, you're not a sports writer, get out of here. I said, no, I was a novelist. I said, but I am now a sports writer. He said, no, you're not, you're fired. So I went back home to Princeton and wrote The Sports Writer. You know, just backed into it.
All right, I'm going to ask you one more question, then I want to open this up to everybody, okay? Because you held up the book, and underneath is Canada.
Yeah.
I hope you've all had a chance to read Canada. If you haven't, you really should, because personally, I love Canada.
Thank you.
And I love Richard in his, it's called Canada, but it's his Montana mode, or his Western mode.
Yeah.
I love the stories that you've written and the novels and Canada. Do you, I call it your Montana mode, and you know, as opposed to the Frank, do you think of it that way? You do?
I do. You know, everybody alive has got a lot of different ways of addressing the world inside of them. You could call it a voice if you wanted to, but we'd have to have a long talk about what voice actually is, and then I would tell you what I thought. But this has a different kind of rhetoric from that. But you know, we all speak to our priest with one voice. We all speak to our cardiologist with another voice. We all speak to our wife with a third voice. We all speak to what we just address the world with, and that means different vocabularies. It means different registers. I mean, maybe the sense of the person coming through is the same, but I have a use for those different modes of address, and I can write a whole novel in one of those modes of address, and I can write another whole completely different novel in another mode of address. And so
you have a use, as in you, at the beginning, you decide what use you want to make of the next novel and decide which of these voices?
And other voices, I have other voices too, but probably they haven't been as widely read as these two have. Yeah, I do. Because it avails me of, as I said, it avails me of a different vocabulary, of a different diction.
Yeah.
And I like that, because for me, when Updike died, which I'm sorry about every day of my life, Adam Gopnik wrote in the New Yorker a wonderful eulogy to Updike, and one of the things Adam said about Updike was that Updike managed to get himself fully expressed in his life. And for me, that's everything. To find a way to use up everything I know how to do by writing a book with it, which isn't to say at all to write about myself, but just to use what I know and use my sense of humor and use that brain that I keep trying to make be better and get everything I can do onto the page. And so this is what that allows me to do, those two different voices, different registers.
Okay, maybe we take 10 or 15 minutes and let you ask questions, and we've got a microphone, so
Let us give it to you.
let us.
There's a gentleman over here.
I think you've lived in a lot of different places, but I believe you grew up in Mississippi.
Yes,
and
sir.
you lived at least part of your life in New Orleans.
Yes, sir.
And it's interesting hearing you talk about the different voices that you've used to write in, and obviously you're expressing yourself in them. Could you talk a little bit, obviously can't talk all about it, about what the South means to you, and particularly what New Orleans means to you, both as a place and as an idea?
As you imply, that's a huge subject, and I mean, Mississippi is where I was helplessly born, and comes with Mississippi, Eudora, and Faulkner, and a huge literary license, which basically says to you there is such a thing as writing, and maybe you might be able to do it. So that was hugely important to me when I was young, even though I didn't want to be a writer when I was young. The other thing the South meant to me was, and this is a little more complicated than that, I wasn't very comfortable in the South. I was on the wrong side of the race issues when I was in high school, which we would say was that I was on the right side of the race issues. And when I got up to, I got out of Jackson as fast as I could because I was going to get in trouble, and had already gotten into some trouble. I wasn't brave. I wanted to get out. So I went to Michigan State to go to college, and everybody in Michigan State thought that I was a cracker. And they thought that I basically had a Klan sheet in my drawer, and they thought that was hilarious. I thought it was awful. It really, I thought it was the worst thing in the world, because I wasn't that kind of person, and I had left Mississippi to get away from that, and here it was waiting for me in central Michigan. And so what the South meant to me was something that I had to get myself the hell away from, so that it didn't typify me, so that if somebody said, well, of course you're a racist, you're from Mississippi, or all that, I just wanted to say, I choose who I am. I choose what I do. I choose what difference I make. So that's another thing that the South meant to me. I happen to believe about those friends of mine in high school who stayed that they were the brave ones. I was not brave. They were the brave ones, and they have lived there, and they have done good, and they are wonderful people, and I talk to them every day on the phone. Not all of them, but some of them. New Orleans was where we all, as you probably know just by your accents, was where you went to do bad. So we went to do bad, and did as much bad as we could. And then later on, Christina and I lived there because she was the head of city planning and ultimately was the assistant deputy mayor for the city under several administrations, Mark Morial, the terrible Ray Nagin. And so when I thought it might be possible to write about New Orleans, I didn't want it to be tinctured by anything that was the South for me. So what I did was I wrote several stories set in New Orleans, but when I wrote them, I left all of the identifying marks of New Orleans out of it. And then after I got the story written, I said to Christina, I said, do you think I can put the New Orleans part in now? So I retrofitted the stories back into New Orleans so that I could be certain that the story was my story, so that the story wasn't something that was a residue of Walker, or was a residue of Tennessee, or was a residue of Eudora, or was a residue of Faulkner. It had to be something that I thought and that I did, and didn't have any of those sonorities about it at all. And it worked out okay. I wrote a story called Calling, which is in the A Multitude of Sins, which I think is probably the best story I ever wrote. But I did it that way. I wrote it out without saying, New Orleans, and then I put it in later. So, we make our peace with these things the best way we can make our peace with them. I would like to be a writer that anybody can read and anybody can understand, Because I don't want to write stories that you have to be a Southerner to appreciate. I don't want to rely on Southern landscape. I don't want to write about race unless it's my version of race. I don't want to write about history unless it's my version of history.
All right, we'll go back.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks for being here tonight. I'm curious about the so far trilogy
Yeah.
in terms of totally loved the sports writer.
Thank you.
Really, I would say changed my life. And then Independence came along, and it's a very different, there's a different rhythm in the book, there's a different energy, and Lay of the Land then takes it down to this level of density of experience that is so, he's so rich in detail going through his life, and I'm wondering, did you consciously make these books very clearly the same person, but different for our benefit? Was that you evolving as a writer, is what you wanted to do?
No.
Because then Canada, in some ways, comes back in a very different cadence again from Lay of the Land, which, you know what I mean?
No,
Is
I
that-
didn't.
Are you trying to make it interesting for us or for yourself, or? Thank you.
I was just, to be truthful with you, I was just trying to do it the best way I could. And I think as you get older, your brain is fuller of stuff. And it probably is true that the Lay of the Land is longer than it should be. And I tried my very, 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 very best to make it shorter than it is. And I just couldn't throw out any more things. And I just wanted to keep the things I kept. And so it came out that way, and I authorized it, and so I took credit for it. But I wasn't doing it for any other reason except for reasons of the book's own internal demands. I felt at its own internal rhythms, and so I wasn't trying to do anything to or for you other than to delight and edify. You know, that great line of Leavis's, that literature is the supreme means by which we renew our sensuous and emotional life and learn a new awareness. That's what I'm always trying to do. So it came out that way this time. But I will say this, that I was a little bit smitten, I should say I was smote by how, I wasn't smitten, I was smote by how dense this Lay of the Land was. And I love it, but I thought these stories are not going to be that way. These stories are going to be much crisper. They're going to be much less dense and funnier too. I think all those books are comic books, but I wanted these to be more easier to read. Because it's about a hurricane. It's about the consequences of a hurricane. You should be able to get to it.
I was interested in how fast you write. Do you have a routine of hours a day, word count, and do you ever get writer's block?
I'm not smart enough to get writer's block. If I don't want to write, I just think Richard doesn't want to write. And I don't like, as you can tell by the gentleman's question before, I don't like to be controlled by forces that I don't understand. I want to run everything. So if I find myself not writing, I think it's because I don't want to. And so I'm happy with that because I'm really slow. I don't count my words. I just try to fill a page if I can of a day and work at it like that. And I'm not in a hurry. The world doesn't need a book from me unless it's the best book I can possibly write. So it doesn't need a faster book from me. Moreover, if I wrote it faster than I do write it, it wouldn't have a chance to be nearly as good. So, and I left law school behind, so I don't want to run my life as though I was a lawyer. I don't want to be accounting for my hours that way. Frost said that literature should be the last vestige of your childhood, and you must deal with it somewhat irresponsibly. And so that's one of the ways that I deal with it irresponsibly. If I don't want to do it, I don't do it. And often I do want to do it. And there's nothing more regimented than that. I mean, I don't want to be neurotic about writing. Human beings write books, and it's a human thing to do. It doesn't require genius. Sometimes you can make something very magical just in the hot little crucible that a book is. But you have to live it. It's a vocation. It's on the same tracks as your life is on. So you have to have a life along with it. And I have one. But thank you. Yes?
Interested to hear, and I'm here, I hear some similarities with the Are You Ready to Meet Your Maker from the beginning of Lay of Your Land.
Oh, well, yeah,
And
sure.
So I'm just wondering, like, I mean, at what point have you heard that story before you've conceived of how you fit it into what
That
you're
little
writing?
story at the beginning of
The prologue, or however you refer to it.
in the Lay of the
Yeah.
Land. I think I read it in the newspaper.
And so was this something also that you had come across, this I'm Here,
Yeah.
really
It
prior
was.
to your
I
conception?
read it somewhere. I don't think anybody told it to me. I think I read it somewhere. Maybe in I don't remember where I wrote it. I just appropriated it. But I've since asked my Minnesota friends, and they've sorted me out on it, and that it's true. It took place in Mankato in 1862, and so I just had it, and so I thought I'm going to use it. And it's kind of like you put it into your book, and you see how you can use it. You put it into your book, and you see what it galvanizes on both sides of it. Because I liked the story insofar it was a chance for them to sort of come to the end and say, I'm here, I'm here, which is crucial to them. So I just tried to make the most of it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
There's one over here.
You know, Ruskin said, composition is the arrangement of unequal things. So I'm always arranging unequal things. Please.
Hello. I'm sorry nobody wants to talk about Raymond Carver, but I'd like to hear about him. Tell us a story.
Oh, he was a lovely man. He was funny. He was dear. He was sweet. He was the happiest man in the world because he'd been saved. He hadn't been saved by Jesus. He'd been saved by the imagination. And he wrote wonderful stories. He loved his life. He was a great friend. There was no downside to him, really. No downside at all. And fiercely unhappy about dying. Just as mad as he could be. He just thought to himself, damn. You know? And you know, he was a lovely, sweet man. And was so generous to me, because for a few years, I was just his sort of tag-along pal. He would call me up and he would say, Richard, I'm going up to, this is a story, okay? He said, Richard, I've been asked to go up to Saskatoon. My God, he said, do you even know where Saskatoon is? And I said, well, yes. I said, it's in Saskatchewan. He said, well, they've asked me to come up there and give a reading at the University of Saskatchewan. He said, and then after that, he said, they're going to take me goose hunting. And I said, I'd like to do that. He said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I'll take the money that they're going to give to me and we'll buy you a ticket and you come up there with me. And so I went up to Saskatoon with Ray, about in 1984. And so we gave a reading together, and then they took us both goose hunting down in southwestern Saskatchewan in terrible cold weather. And Ray and I shot a bunch of geese. And so we had to find somebody to pluck the geese. And so we got in the car, and somebody told us about this goose plucker who was way the hell out on some horrible gumbo road out in the middle of nowhere. You can just picture a house in the middle of Saskatchewan prairie. And we got out there, and the goose plucker wasn't there, but his absolutely drop-dead beautiful daughter was. And I could still see Carver kind of looking at me because she came out of the house holding a hatchet. This gorgeous girl holding a hatchet. And so we said, would you maybe clean our geese? And she said, absolutely. And she took a goose and she went pop like that. She just went pop and knocked their heads off like that. And we got back in the trucks when we were leaving, and Ray said, I'll bet you $1,000 I get her into a story before you do.
And who won the bet?
I won the bet. But he was that kind of guy.
Well, I was going to say maybe that's a good place. It's 8 o'clock. That's a good place to end. Nice story. And we all okay?
Yeah.
We end there?
Thank you
Okay,
all
well,
so
thank
much.
you all very much. Okay.